Okay, so now it's time to start looking at partitioning, actually using the tools and the different partition types we can create. One of the really nice things about having virtualization is that you can play with these tools and not destroy anything. So I have our class server up here, and you can also see that I have configured a couple of servers, a Linux and a Windows server for later on when we talk about LVM and RAID. But on the Linux server, I click on that and I can click on settings, select storage, and here I can actually add a virtual drive, which will allow me to do everything I could possibly want to do to test my partitioning skills. So I'll do that. Click there, click on add a disk, create a new disk, we'll leave it at its default, select next, dynamic, perfectly fine, and we really don't need this very big. What we'll do is we'll change it from 8 to 1 gigs. Once again, it won't matter. It's dynamic, so it'll start out very small. We're typically not going to be using it for a lot more than partitioning until we get into the LVM and RAID. You can give the name if you want to give it a new name. That may be something you want to do. All right, so here it is. We have it and it's set. We can close this, click OK, and we'll take a snapshot, just so we have it. You can name it if you want to. And let's start it up. I'll pause the video. As soon as it's up, we'll get going. So the system is booted up. I've eschewed into root because any type of disk administration will definitely require root privilege. And we're going to look at two command line tools, fdisk and part-ed. But to explain partition types, I really like seeing it visually. So what I'm going to do is download a front-end GUI for the part-ed utility, which will give us a little more visual colors that we can look at when we're describing these different partitions. So what we'll do is go out to Yum, our friend Yum. It's not on your system by default. And we'll do a search for gpart. And we can see it's available. Now it's available because I have the EPL repository installed. And if you need to do that, just go back and watch the videos on Yum, and I'll show you exactly where to get that and how to install it. So let's go ahead and install this. So Yum, install, yes. Excellent. Clear my screen and type gparted. And what I end up with is a fantastic partitioning tool. I've used this many times in my career. I've used it on Windows machines, Linux machines, OS X. It really is an amazing tool. And you can get this on a live CD, by the way, so you can boot to it and use it. And it does everything from moving partitions to resizing partitions to creating partitions. So what you're seeing here, if we look up here in the top right-hand corner, we see the current disk we're looking at. In this case, it's /dev/SDA, which we know now means that that is the first drive on the system. And this first drive has two partitions. It has a very small /boot partition, which is /dev/SDA1, and then SDA2, which is LVM. And we'll discuss LVM a little later on. And we also have some unallocated space. Now, this is exactly how your disk is set up in the virtual machine. If I drop the arrow, I see SDB, the second disk, the one we just installed. And from here, I can literally go and create new partitions on here. By default, there are really two primary partition types. You can have a primary partition, an extended partition, and then inside of an extended, you can have logical partitions that you can create. Now, there is a limitation, and this is going back historical limitation of 4 partitions when you're using a MBR-based partition table. So I can create 4 primary partitions and that's it. Typically, you'll create 1 primary partition, maybe 2. If you need to go above 4, you'll create an extended partition, and then within the extended partition, you'll create the logical drives that we'll be looking at. But before we can actually create partitions, we have to select the partition table type that we want to use. If I right-click on this unallocated space and select new, it comes back and gives me a little message about you need to create a partition table. Alrighty, what I would do is select device, create partition table, and if I select advanced, you can see by default it's defaulting to MS-DOS, which seems weird, it's a Linux machine, but what it really means is MBR, partition table. Select the down arrow and you can see there are many more options available to me. Really, you'll only be looking at two on a regular basis, either MBR or the GPT. MBR is older legacy partition table. It has the limitations of 4 primary partitions or 3 primaries with an extended and then a bunch of logicals inside of it. The GPT breaks out of all that and allows us to create up to 128 partitions, and there's no difference. There's nothing about this logical extended. They're all primary partitions. Mac OS, the modern Mac OS operating systems or laptops, use the GPT by default. All modern operating systems have the capacity to use GPT, but many still use the MBR. So I'll select MBR because that's typically the one you'll come across, and I'll say apply. You can see it's going through, and now if I select this and select new, I can actually create a partition. I can select create as, and you can see I have 2 choices right now. I have a primary or an extended. I'm going to select primary because I want to show that this is one of the great things you can do with the G parted. I'll select it. I'll tell it to narrow it down. I'll select add, and as you can see now we have dev SDB partition 1, which would be dev SDB 1. I can create up to 4 of these primary partitions. If I want anything more than 4 partitions on this disk, I would have to create an extended, and within the extended I would create logicals. So let's go ahead and do that so you can see what that looks like. So it's telling me what I have left. I'll select extended. Notice it just puts a blue bar around the gray area, which means it's still unallocated space. I'll select add. So the only thing that's changed is that we have this blue barrier around the unallocated space, and that's the extended partition. So you can't do anything, save files to an extended partition. Only way you can do it is you have to create a logical partition. So I'll click on the extended partition, right click, and now look at the options. All I have available, since I've highlighted the extended, is the logical. I'll select that. I'll actually make a couple of these so you can see. Now, we also have the choice about file system types that we would like to use. We'll get more into that when we actually get to the command line. For right now, we'll just leave it at ext2. And I'll collect another one. Once again, no other option but logical, right? And I'll click on that so we can see it. And I can keep creating partitions in here up to the last letter in the alphabet. Once the last letter in the alphabet is done, I can no longer create any more partitions. So that's the limitation. This is an older way of doing it, not something I would typically do, and I'll show you when we get to LVM, which is the default that we use in CentOS, why LVM is so much better. It allows us to create these multiple partitions that we need for different situations, but it's so dynamic, it's amazing. So that's a really visual way. So right now we have, this is pretty slick, we have SDB1 or SDB, and on SDB we have a primary partition. Then we have the extended partition, which if you look under here, it's given it the partition number of 2. And then we have within there a couple of logical partitions, and then we have unallocated space within the extended. So what we'll do now, after visually seeing this, we're going to drop back to the command line. First one we'll use is fdisk, the old tried and true partitioning tool, and then we'll look at parted, which is the back end for what we're doing with gparted.